And now we're going to go into Qing era China. The Qing is actually going to be the last imperial dynasty, and this one is going to go from 1644 all the way up until 1912. So, uh, as we're looking at the Qing, first we're going to look at the way that the Ming fell. The Ming dynasty begins to uh, sort of stagnate, and then it begins to decline into the beginning of the 17th century. So while Europe is beginning to go into the Americas, is really pushing into the Western Hemisphere and down into Southeast Asia and Africa and even into India, the Ming have been uh, relaxing and allowing themselves to basically be a one-stop shop for Europeans looking for fine silks, fine goods, whatever they need from China. Now, because of this, you had these poor rulers that left the Ming increasingly isolated from the rest of the world. These poor rulers also isolated themselves um, into the Forbidden City, sort of keeping themselves away from the rest of the population of China, and so they left the actual ruling of the country to their counselors and to governors and bureaucrats throughout the empire. And a lot of the times that eunuchs would actually gain power, and this is where corruption grew, as the eunuchs basically felt that they didn't need to follow the laws of the land. They were excluded from polite society usually, and so they just decided to take a lot of their revenge out on the government by taking part of it. And so this leads to a lot of mismanagement of government resources. And so, just like with the Yuan, with the Mongol rulers, you have a lot of mismanagement of resources. You start seeing a lot of natural disasters and famine and disease go through. And so you have the beginning of rebellions by starving peasants. And the army is actually asked to put down the rebellions by the citizens of the citizens by the ruling class. And so the army goes through, and basically the army is forced to kill civilians. And during this, a high-ranking general, Li Zicheng, mutinies and goes back to the capital. Basically, they've had all that they can stand by the Ming, and they are going to take over. They feel that the emperor is not doing his duty and needs to be removed. At the same time, you have an invasion from the north by the Manchu people. The Manchu people feel abandoned by the Ming government. The Manchu people are nomadic, semi-nomadic peoples in the northeast of China that have been dealing with nomadic tribes for hundreds of years. They have seen increased attacks by nomads, and the government really didn't help them any at all. And then there is a war with Korea that leads to more loss of land by the Manchu. And so the government, once again, doesn't help them, leaves them out on their own. And the Manchu really feel abandoned. The Manchu people come together and begin and fight back against the Koreans. And so the Manchu are able to conquer Korea and then continue to move. Marching towards the capital. So at this time, in 1642, you have an invading force from the north coming in towards the capital, and a mutiny from within headed towards the capital. And so the Ming loyalists have to fight on two fronts, and the armies are going to basically decimate the Ming. The Ming are going to be no match for the military might of Li Zicheng, and they're not going to be any sort of resistance to the northern Manchu as they come in. And so within the couple of years, you have the end of the Ming when the Chongzhen emperor actually commits ritual suicide in 1644. And after this, I believe his family is sold off into slavery, and basically um, the uh, the bloodline of the Ming dynasty is severed, and there is no more Ming. Uh, but there's no more royal Ming. However, the remnants of the Ming Empire, the Ming Dynasty, fight on. They continue to try and defeat the rebels, feeling that if they defeat the rebels, they can. The individual leaders feel that they can, if they can defeat the rulers, then they can themselves um, become the new emperor by retaining that traditional bloodline, that traditional dynastic bloodline. And so the remnants are fighting on, continuing, trying to remain in power. And um, but with this, you see Li Zicheng actually taking over and becoming the new emperor. So Li Zicheng assumes the role of emperor and creates the Shun dynasty, which, as you can see here, is a very long-lived dynasty of all of a few months. And so you have the Manchu coming in up north. You have the Shun dynasty, which has taken most of the lands of the Ming, and then you have the remnants of the Ming down in the south of China. So you have uh, this three player battle basically going on here, and Li Zicheng fights the remnants of the Ming, defeats the remnants of the Ming, and then marches to face the Manchu. Um, and it's during this time that the Manchu are um, going to change their tactics. Really, they're going to march to the capital as not only avengers of the wrongs that have been done to them, but they're also going to be sounding that they are coming down as avengers uh, to the Ming as well, to the Ming Emperor, and to the system that has been put in place. Um, and so what happens is that there is a Ming general up in the near the wall, the Great Wall of China, and he makes an alliance with the Manchu. Basically, he says that he'll let them in through if they decide to, if they end up giving him land and titles, and Wu Sangui decides to just let the Manchu into China proper. Eventually, he's going to actually try to betray the Manchu and will end up dying. But before all that, he allows the Manchu into China, and Prince Dorgan of Manchu defeats Li Zicheng, and Li Zicheng disappears sometime in 1645. And so Li Zicheng has a um, divided history, divided legacy in Chinese history. Some people see him as a Robin Hood figure that wanted to give the poor their due and to fight against corruption, and so he's seen as a very romanticized figure by some people, and by others he's seen as an usurper, someone who went against the natural code of the dynasty and tried to take power illegitimately. So he's seen in these both of these lights, and through books, plays, movies, later TV, and et cetera, et cetera. He's been portrayed both of these different manners. He disappears in 1645. A lot of his the people that glorify him say that he basically turned into a roving Robin Hood type figure that robbed from the rich and gave to the poor. Most historians feel that he died in battle, and was never really, his body was never found. But however he ended his life, what matters is that the Shun dynasty has this short and brief flourish before it is eventually um, brought down to the ground. And so Prince Dorgun of the Manchu defeats Li, and in um, uh, defeats Li, and in 1644, before the final battle, he's already crowned himself the Shunzi Emperor, and the Manchu then become the Qing, and the Shunzi Emperor claims the mandate of heaven, and this unifies all of China. And knowing this, you see that the Qing dynasty is actually the last of these dynasties. The Qing dynasty will last into the 20th century, where it will eventually be the final Chinese dynasty before we move into the modern era into the 20th century. And so the Qing become this great force within the East, but only really within the East. After the reign of the Shunzi Emperor, the next great king is Kangxi, and he's arguably the greatest ruler in Chinese history. He's able really to bring back the Qing into this dominance throughout the East. He stabilized imperial rule. Make sure that the empire will last for quite a while, and he really makes it so that the Qing have the dominance in the East that they have traditionally had. Um, After Kangxi comes Qianlong, who rules for another 60 years, and he's known for his diligence, his tolerance, and his intellectual curiosity. Throughout his entire reign, or most of his entire reign, he is really into spreading Chinese culture and mixing Chinese culture with that of others coming in. So he's really big um, on bringing in influences from the outside, things like participating in Western style events, in Western competitions. Like here, you see that he liked the idea of holding shows of martial arts and martial skills. So he would actually have tournaments in his court to show just how strong the Qing fighters were. He was really big into creating a steady flow of money in and out of China with the West. By this point, by the beginning of his reign in 1735, the China had basically made itself the place to come and get fine goods. It wasn't a power that was going to go out and colonize or settle or really set up any sort of posts outside of Asia. So for the most part, throughout his reign, he is a very strong and forward-thinking leader. However, towards the end of his reign, he really falls under a very corrupt influence during the end of the 18th century and moving into the 19th century. You have a strong conservative push in China that begins to look at outsiders, especially um, at the people of Europe, as being a terrible influence. You start seeing the effects of Western thought and Western goods coming in, and it's seen as a corrupting influence. And so the more conservative people in in China begin to plot to make it so that Qianlong is going to get rid of the Westerners, and he begins to uh, remove Western influence, and this will lead to a lot of unrest. A lot of people are going to be losing money, losing influence, and this eventually leads to the White Lotus Rebellion in 1794, which we'll get more into in class. But with this rebellion, you have the removal of the emperor and the beginning of the long slide of the Qing into being uh, um, antagonists to the West, and sort of having to eventually face off against the West in order to keep their autonomy. So politically, the Qing were traditionalists. The Qing had a heavy and great devotion to Confucianism. They were very traditional in this way, and they believed in a hierarchy that kept the ruling class up top and the lower classes at the bottom. And this is just the way things were. But outside, and this is a traditional Chinese culture. But what the Qing would do is they added in a two-prong strategy to protect their ethnic identity, their Manchu identity. You know, they had it to where Manchu nobility was defined as legally distinct, and they were outside of the normal laws of Chinese society, and so you had these traditional um, outsiders from China, from northern China, come in and set up their own government and have a legal distinction away from the more mainland Chinese. And this is why later on refugees and immigrants from China are going to have a distinctive dress and a distinctive language. Is that many of the people that can afford to leave China are going to be Manchu, are going to be a stronger traditional Chinese culture. And with this strong culture, you had Manchus given farmland and organized into separate military units so that they hardly ever really commingled with the rest of Chinese society. They'd come over and taken over Chinese government, but they still kept themselves as distinct ethnically and culturally distinct from the rest of China, and they would do even keep themselves agriculturally and militarily distinct as well. And so what this ends up leading into is what's known as a diarchy, where important administrative positions are shared equally between the two between normal Chinese and Manchu. So you would have in regions that were heavily Manchu or split Manchu, you would have a administrator that just dealt with Manchu issues, and another administrator that dealt with everyone else. So it was a dual system, a dual bureaucracy, or a dual monarchy. So that's why it's known as a diarchy. And so, like I said, this is the getting to be the end of the dynastic period in China, and you could really see it as the West becomes even stronger, and China begins it continues its isolationist policy. You see a lot of military confrontation, a lot of pressure um, to begin to trade even more. The people, the government of China only let out so much goods. It wasn't like today's Chinese economy that it just throws everything out as much as possible. They understood that that the people of Europe wanted fine silks, they wanted some spices, they wanted um, textile textiles and pottery, things like that. And so there began to become military confrontation to try and pressure China to trade. You know, they would Europeans would encroach in China's sovereign territory, wanting to get into into battles with China because they knew that they had become weak, and they knew that the military and naval strength, especially of the West, was greater than that of China. So there was this desire to provoke China, and one of the things that happens in this provocation is that the Russian envoys begin to ignore the tribute system that had gone back to the era of the Ming and the non-aggression pact that had been set up. The Russian envoys would give tribute to the Chinese whenever they came and met, and they began to ignore that. People began to ignore Chinese might, and you saw everyone begin to sort of take pieces of China, like the East India Company. It sets up in Canton, and what happens here is that there's this uneven balance of trade where the Chinese are going to have all the leverage in trade, and the East India Company, the English and the Dutch East India companies, are going to want uh, to uh, explore more trade opportunities between the nations. But since the Chinese have all the leverage, they they continue to ignore the demands, or refuse to accept any reasonable demands from the West. They hold all the cards, and as I said, Qianlong eventually is going to fall under very conservative influences, and he's going to end up dismissing the British East India Company and any requests that they have for more tea, for greater trade of tea. And this is going to end up being one of the last mistakes that China makes. Now, daily life in Qing China, it becomes a lot more conservative, a lot more fundamental, as the Western influences begin to move into China. You start seeing a pushback against European values, and the family becomes much more important, much more traditional, especially as the Qing set up their own two-headed system. The ideal family unit was this joint family where you had in-laws living uh, close by, or in the same neighborhood. You had a large extended family uh, that would allow you to retain this close dynamic with the people that are of your bloodline. And so beyond that joint family, there was also the clan, extended kinship units. So it was all about family, and it was all about these little enclaves of family throughout the cities. And anything outside of the family was sort of seen as other and unwanted. Basically everything in the family life in Qing China is very closed off, and so Qing society in general starts becoming more and more closed off. The role of women also becomes much more traditional, as the wife was expected to be subordinate to the husband. And this is where you start seeing the beginning of female children being less desirable, because everything goes through the male bloodline, and a female oldest born basically meant that all your goods were going to be going to another family. All your possessions or all your wealth was going to be going to another family. So female children were less desirable. It was all about having more male heirs and being able to keep as much as your of your family's wealth and your family's goods in in this in your own family, and not letting outsiders, not letting people outside of the clan get to your stuff. Um, Women in theory were inferior to men, but this is not always the case in practice. And we will definitely go into this more in class, as eventually by the end of Qing China, the Qing dynasty in China, you have actually a female empress take over and really face off against the West. So here, before we end this section on China, one of the things that we need to note is how exactly the Ming and the Qing really changed Chinese culture, and how this change basically sets up this next big battle between China and the West. And the Ming really were instrumental in making sure that the population of China and the economy of China really um, really expanded. It, as you can imagine, during the reign of the Mongols, there wasn't a lot of city building, there wasn't a lot of population upswing, and there wasn't really a lot of manufacturing or a lot of a lot of trade happening. And so among the Ming, after the fall of the Yuan and the rise of the Ming, you have a baby boom that lasts for a long time. And because of this boom, because people were needing to go to places to find work, trying to spread out among the entire country, you saw the center of China begin to move south away from the capital city in modern day Beijing. Instead, you start seeing the center of the nation really become much more into southern China. By 1390, you had a population of 300 million people in Ming China, and this was almost double from when the Yuan were in charge. So by the beginning of the third, within 100 years, you had a almost a doubling of the population. And so with this population comes greater opportunities for manufacturing, greater opportunities for trade, and greater opportunities for improvements in agriculture. And so the Ming really pushed that through, and the Qing are actually going to begin to lay down the seeds for industrialization. The Qing economy is maybe ready for takeoff. You have the beginnings of small industrial warehouses, and you have this mercantile class that's really under state control, that, if given a little bit more leeway, could really push trade and push manufacturing into uh, uh, the ability uh, to compete with the West, and actually with a large population, with a large base of workers, the Qing really could be this great superpower in the East if they were ready for this. However, at the time, the Qing are very traditional. They have a heavy preference on agriculture that leads to heavy taxes on manufacturing and commerce. And so you can't really have too big a warehouse, too big of factories. Manufacturing and trade really, it's very slow going. And you have this idea of continuity over change. So instead of instead of evolving and adapting to the times, there is this idea that continuity is much more important, that keeping things the way that they've been done before, that artisan work over heavy factory work is much more preferable, that tradition over innovation, so keeping things as simple as they were is much more important than being on the cutting edge. And it is going to be um, this uh, bias that the Qing have against change and innovation that ultimately will be what sinks the Chinese, and ultimately what leads to the West overtaking China even in the East.